Some love running. Some hate it. Some are just starting. Some have been running since they took their first steps. Some think running is the most natural form of movement there is. Some think it's demanding, hard, and takes everything they have. Some run fast. Some run far. Some run for fun. Some run because it's an obsession. Some run because they want to get fitter, lose weight, or feel energized. Some run because they want to beat their opponents, their personal best, or win a race. Everyone is different, but everyone is a runner. The question is, which kind of runner are you? Find out April 2022.
Welcome to the latest installment of Polar's virtual running clinics. We've got some great content for you today. I'm excited to present a very special guest, a true Aussie legend and world record breaker, Steve Moneghetti. Steve is a 4-time Olympian, Commonwealth Games athlete, and a self-proclaimed distance runner for life. He's here to answer your burning running questions in that true Moneghetti style that we know and love, shooting straight from the hip. Topics we'll cover today include tips on combining your low and high intensity training, the importance of setting your race pace, nailing your heart rate zones, and getting that pre-race hit out right. Polar have been creating products that give you personal guidance for fitness, sports, and health since well before Steve won the Berlin Marathon. And we're bringing you these virtual running clinics for the same reason we create these products, so that you can enjoy your training, perform at your best, and enjoy a better quality of life. So stay tuned to hear Steve's take on the all-new Polar Pacer Pro GPS running watch that he's been trying out for the past couple of weeks. Now I'll pass the mic over to your Polar hosts for the session. From the ANZ team, we have Ross Dougal, Channel Manager for Sport, and our sports scientist, John Easdown.
Thanks, Kylie. We're very excited to report that we've run past the halfway mark in our series. Our experts have been an incredible help to the running community. Benita's shown us how to create the ultimate running plans for the 5 and 10K and the half and full marathon. Brad's helped us understand how to get more out of our training with better recovery and how to avoid injury. And Danielle's done a great job in taking us through the guidelines and examples for training and race nutrition, which are vital, especially if you are going the distance with your running. A big thanks also to everyone who has been with us through the series. But even if you are joining us for the first time, don't forget you can join the Polar Running Club. It's free to register. All you need to do is click the link on your screen, verify your email address. It's the fastest way to get the recorded content from all our experts, including the session, as well as running plans and resources, and you'll go in the draw to win a new running watch every month. Our expert for this session is an Olympic medalist and Australian running legend. He's going to be a great help in taking us through his top tips for training, racing, pacing, and also answering the most popular questions sent in from runners. We're delighted that he's been able to share his learnings over an incredible running career, and it gives us great pleasure to introduce Steve.
Steve Moneghetti here, Olympian, Commonwealth Games, multiple reps at those events. And I probably have been able to call myself a distance runner for life. I think whilst I had that competitive career, it's been great to be able to continue to run, and I have a passion for what I do, and it's terrific to be able to still do it. And on things like today, to be able to pass on some racing, training tips, and just give some general advice to all you people out there to hopefully allow you to enjoy it as much as I do.
Thank you so much, Steve. We're really fortunate to be talking to runners today who may have signed up for a 5 or 10K or half marathon or full marathon or even longer. What we'd love to do is jump into the big topic of training and getting prepared for a race. It would be great if you could share your top 3 training tips with us that have helped you through your career in running training. First off, how did you go about finding what was the best race distance for you?
I think the race distance is very determined by your training. So for me, I was pretty slow. I did a lot of track stuff at school. And obviously for me, the longer the distance got, the better I seemed to place in the event and the more comfortable I was. So when I looked at my training, I just progressively increased my training mileage, and I'm a real mileage person. So, I got up to running twice a day, every day of the week, and running 200 Ks a week. But interestingly, about 180 K of that was just long, slow distance. So just going out at conversation pace and just chatting with my training partners. And so that's just building your base, your sort of endurance base. That's the foundation. And then the other 20K was the quality top end speed stuff. And I did that really quickly, like faster than my marathon race pace. And so that just allowed me over the years, the training that I built, that foundation that I built allowed me to then be able to look at the events that I wanted to do. And for me, if you're running 200 Ks a week, obviously a 42K marathon event on one day is realistic. And that's what I kind of look at. I say, don't pick the race. We all want to run a marathon, but if you don't have the time or the capacity to run, you probably need to be running 100, 120K a week. So you might say, well, I can fit in 60 or 70K. My long run's about 18K once a week. There you go. I've locked you in as a half marathon event. So that's the perfect event for you. So that's a nice way to think about what training can you accommodate. Then you add about 20% on to your longest run that you're probably doing once a week or once every couple of weeks. That then say, okay, well, there's the race distance that I should target. So that's one great tip. And I think then you sort of look at doing things like, okay, well, if that's the sort of event that I want to choose, you probably then look at, if you're targeting something like a Gold Coast Marathon, you want to then about 3 or 4 weeks out from the actual event, you want to do a bit of a race hit out. So if you're running, for example, we're focusing on the half, so you probably want to do sort of a 15 or 16K hit out, just so you're feeling confident about the distance. It also gives you a chance to practice what gear you're going to wear on the day, lock in your technology, and make sure your food, your nutrition, all of that's okay. So it's a bit like race practice. And I like to do that 3 or 4 weeks out. And for me, people may know I won the Berlin Marathon. And a couple of weeks before that, I did a half marathon and I ran really well. I just got away with it. So that's why I say 3 weeks before, because that 2 weeks, I actually had a really bad blister on the back of my foot and I was just struggling to get right for Berlin. I got away with it, but 3 weeks would have been perfect. So that's where I say it's probably a good chance for people to have the hit out then. And the other thing that I did regularly, and I encourage people to do this, and you've got the chance to do it, is I studied the course before the event. So I knew it backwards, because it's one thing you can do. So why wouldn't you get ahead of the game, have a look at the course map, and even if you can, run the last bit of the course just in training, so that in your mind, when you're getting a bit fatigued and you're starting to lose concentration, you're starting to get anxious, you know where you are out on the course and you know how far you got to go. So there's a couple of tips that worked really well for me, and I did that regularly. There was never a race that I ran where I hadn't run the last section of the course at some stage. If I was in a position to win, I wanted to make sure I could really nail home that initiative.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. And getting ready for race time, so heading towards the start line, if you could share 3 tips with us that have really helped you execute a good race, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I think, again, it's practicing what you preach. And people often say to me, oh, look, I've been running at 5-minute Ks for the marathon training, and I thought I might start out and run the first K at 4:30. So I'll go, well, good luck with that. Your body's not a miracle work. If you've been running at 5-minute Ks, what pace should you run? Well, you should run at 5-minute Ks. So be realistic about what your goal is, and don't listen to other people. Oh, you're better than that. Why don't you go out hard the first K. And I remember I read somewhere where this person went out and they were 10 minutes ahead of their goal time at halfway and they ended up running a PB. No, that's not going to work. That might be a story that someone else is telling you, but the fact of the matter is you need to set a realistic goal pace and stick to it. And if you've been practicing that in training, really racing is just the public display of the training that you've been doing. So set it on your watch. Maybe if you've got your Polar Pacer Pro like I have, you set your K splits on your watch and you stick to it. And they'll be a reminder when you're ticking them off in the early part of the race that you're right on the pace that you've been training at. And that will allow you to just spread your effort out for the whole race. And hopefully you hit the finish line absolutely stuck just as you cross the finish line. That's the aim. And I think the other thing that most people do, and people out there now might be thinking, well, yeah, Steve's an elite athlete. He's ran all his life. He knows he can freshen up and race at a high level just at will. It's not that easy. I had to practice, and I got to a stage where I would be backing off on my mileage. So 2 weeks out, I'd run 75% of my mileage. I'd drop back to about 140K. And then the week before the race, I halved my mileage. And I'm a maths teacher, so I love that it was a clear 100K a week for me. I'm standing on the start line of the Olympic marathon knowing that I've had those couple of weeks of freshening up just to give your body a chance to really get the benefit all of that training you've done. And I just find people tend to want to run into the race a bit too much. So I have those hard and fast rules to make sure that I'm fresh and can really benefit the training that I've put in. And then finally, don't do anything new on race day or on the day before. You go to the expo and you see on a stand there's some new whiz-bang super-duper thing that everyone's using, and you're going to decide to wear flippers at the start line because, someone broke the world record last week. No, don't be stupid, okay? Just implement what you've practiced in training. Don't sort of block out all that chat. Entertain yourself by it. Take a bit of information, catch up with a few friends, but don't be influenced by anything that late. If it's that late, then if you're putting something in, then you're getting desperate. So really just stick to what you've done and it'll serve you well.
One of the biggest topics that's come up is around pacing, and we get a lot of questions around how do I know how I should find my pace? How should I actually pace myself during the run? And it's a really big one. And we certainly see that causing a lot of problems early on in people's training where they're not only pushing some distance, but the intensity is too high, and that leads to a lot of injuries. But I think when we're looking at race day or as you're going through your training, it'd be really interesting to understand, how have you gone about setting or understanding or feeling that pace across the 5, the 10, the 21 and the 42K? If you could take us through that and then how you actually monitor that through the run, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like to think I'm one of the best distance runners, or was one of the best distance runners in Australia. So not just a marathon runner. So I like to think that I was good across a range of events. And I used to think of the 5K and the 5K on the track, or it was fast. That was like my sprint race. So I didn't really have to pick the pace for that. I just ran flat out. Hopefully got to about 3K, and that's the crucial point of a 5K. And I hung on. I was strong enough for my training, so I backed myself in that I would get over the line. But I actually found the 5K probably the toughest distance for me because I was really pushing the envelope. So that was at my speed limit. So I really found that challenging. It's quick, it's over with. I was running just over 13 minutes, but it was really hard because I was in the red lining it the whole way. So that's a 5K for me. I don't know, that's probably not a lot of advice for people, but for me, it was a sprint race. And then the 10K, I used to do a 5K hit out a couple of weeks before, and I would know what shape I was in for 5K, double the time and add a minute. So that was my pace exactly. So and you think I'm a 13:25 was my PB for 5K, double that, 26:50. What was my PB for 10K? 27:48. So there you go, 58 seconds, almost right on the money. So that sets your pace up. So you do that 5K, double it, add the minute, and then that's the pace you should run for 10K. For the half, that's the normal person's marathon. I love the half. It's my favourite distance. I broke the world record a few times for the half. So for me, it's where you really get the result of the work you've done in training. So a really good indicator is your 10K pace, but just a little bit slower. So I think I want to get through 10K comfortably so I can almost think that I'll be able to do that back end 10K at the same pace. So you do have to allow a little bit. It's a bit slower than your 10K goal pace, but not much. And you tend to get into the zone in the half, and you can probably sort of know that you're pacing yourself, but you're still running at a pretty good pace close to your 10K PB. And historically, that's kind of where it works out for the half. And then the marathon, well, that's tough. But, you have to pace yourself in the marathon, because if you don't, you hit the wall, you get very tired, and you probably walk into the finish line. And we have an unwritten rule that halfway in the marathon, it's 42.2K. So my maths brain tells me halfway is 21.1. But you know what? Halfway is 30K in the marathon, because those last 12K, someone drags those K markers down the road further. I don't know how they do it, but they're further down the road. I know it sounds dumb, but history tells me that it's fact, that halfway in a marathon is 30K. So you just want to make sure you've got plenty in the tank for that last 12K, because that's the business end of the race.
That's absolutely brilliant. And I think some great advice as people are starting to tune themselves up for those races, but just some really key tips there for race day and pacing as well. What's fantastic is we've had a lot of questions that have come in where people would love to get some help from you, Steve. So we'd love to now jump across to the most frequently asked questions that have come in from our runners. So we'll start again with training. And the first question we've got here is, how do I choose a race target? I'm doing the 10K. I'm 16 years old. I've had 8 weeks training, and now getting the paces down to 4 minutes 30, which is really good. How would you advise people to try and work out how do they select a race pace or race goal from what they're seeing in training?
And can I say thanks for the audience for putting the questions to me. And I really enjoy the discussion, and obviously covers areas I sometimes might take for granted. Now, for me, that's a great example. At 16, a 10K race, that's a solid distance to be doing. And of 8 weeks training, hopefully you've done some running before that, but of 8 weeks training, if you're running at 4:30K pace, again, I say racing replicates training. So if you're running 4:30 now, I think realistically for you, run at 4:30 pace for that 10K. So get the 10K done at 4:30, then have another training block, and then maybe set another 10K in a couple of months where you can maybe get your pace down to 4:20. So gradual improvements. But if that's what you're training at, then realistically, that is what you would expect to race at.
Fantastic. And we've touched on this already, but we've got a question here on race simulation. So would running a race simulation for a marathon runner, say 30K, be a good measure for race readiness? And how many weeks would be a good balance between going too early and too late? I think it would be really interesting to discuss this across the distances, because I think there's a really big question here as well around how far should that race simulation be? And obviously we really don't want to be in that danger zone and blow ourselves up before a race. But if you could run through the distances and what a good race simulation would be in timing, that would be incredibly helpful.
So race simulation for me, I'm sort of old school. So because I was doing so much distance and volume in my training, I actually could just do an 8K hit out a couple of weeks before. That was enough for me, because I was so strong that for me just to sharpen up and get my legs going at quicker than race pace was fine. So it sounds strange, but I was running 42K, and an 8K a couple of weeks out was fine for me. But if you're not doing that amount of volume, then you need to have a race hit out that's closer to race distance. So again, I'm sort of thinking, 75%, 80%. So if you're running the 5K, I would think just a 3K hit out would be fine, because it's 5K is not a long distance. And then 10K, you might just have a 5K, do a park run. So you have to make it practical. I could say do a 7.5K hit out, which is 75% of 10K. But if you can't find one, just go to park run. It's easy. It's every Saturday, So make it practical to you. So shorter than race distance, but preferably greater than half race distance. So again, for the half marathon, you're probably looking at a 10K, and maybe you do a warm up or a little bit at the back end just to get you through a bit further. But for the marathon, it's quite specific. It's going to be very difficult for you to find a race over a half marathon. So you might want to do a time trial, or what we call a tempo run of more, 30K plus, because you're going to be doing 42K at a certain pace Well, you need to have at least given your body exposure to preferably 32K at that race pace. But you need to do it far enough out, so 2 or 3 weeks out, to give your body time to recover. So it's as much about the mental preparation, knowing that you're going to be on the start line thinking, hey, I've got this covered. A couple of weeks ago, I did a 35K hit out at race pace. So, gee, I've just got to do an extra 6 or 7K and there's a crowd around me. It's going to be fantastic. I've got lots of help and I've got gels and drink stations along the way. So lock it in, I'll be fine. So that's the kind of mindset that you want to have about over half race distance, and just to give you the mental confidence to know that you're going to be able to cope on the day.
Brilliant. And you've also mentioned hitting the wall, and this is somewhere we really want to help out the audience. So also it's got some other terminology, but how do we avoid here bonking or hitting the wall? And there's obviously a couple of factors which may lead into that, but your advice here would be fantastic.
I don't want to keep harping on it, but if you train properly, you're highly unlikely to bonk or hit the wall. Now, if you've trained appropriately and then you got your watch, you got your time set, and you stick to that race pace that you've set that's practical, realistic, and possible, you should be fine. If you go out too hard, you're going to blow up and you will hit the wall. So what we spoke about earlier, if you get sucked in and you suddenly change your pace and you're running much quicker than what you've done in training and what you can expect to do, then you will hit the wall. Training, firstly, is really important. And then it's being realistic about what pace you want to run, and then it's sticking to it. The things you can obviously do is to have a gel or make sure you're keeping hydrated. So on the drink stations, making sure you're grabbing your water or your sports drink just to top up your electrolytes. And that will help just stave off hitting the wall or bonking. So they're things you can do during the race. But hopefully, if your training's been good and you pace yourself properly, they're just bonuses and you're not really relying on them. They're a help, but they're not really your bread and butter. You've locked it in because you've trained really well leading in.
Great stuff. Another question we get often is around monitoring. Is monitoring your heart rate important? If so, what should I be looking for in my training?
Well, it's important to me because, I'm still doing sessions. Probably 2 parts to that. I think you need to be aware of what your heart rate zones are. So, I'm 59 now. So, my max is dropping down a little. It's still pretty high. I still get it up in the 180. So I'm still going pretty well. But you need to be able to monitor it in session. You just want to use it as a guide in session. So you don't want to be going, oh, wow, I'm way too high. I've got to pull back. You can ease in and out. So you use it as a bit of a sort of a fallback, as a bit of a guide. But then when it's really important is when you then download your info afterwards, I look at it and I say, oh, wow, gee, no wonder I was starting to drop away in those last couple of reps or the back end of that tempo run because my heart rate was too high and I was pushing from a long way out. And I would expect in a session early on, my heart rate gets up, but I recover really well. So it drops down and then it sort of flatlines a little bit. But then hopefully you get through the session and you just peak a little bit right at the end. But if it's really shooting up or your times are dropping away, then you need to just reflect on, okay, I didn't pace myself very well. Maybe do less reps next week and try and hold that pace, or either do the same number of reps at a slower pace. So it's a good post-race indicator of how strong you were in your session. You've got to learn from that. So it's a learning session. You put it back in and the next time, you might have a peek at it while you're doing the session. So it's a bit of both. In session, just as an advisory tool, and then out of session, really good feedback and learnings.
Fantastic. The next question we have here is for somebody running the half marathon, 2-part question. So should my long runs be between 10 to 13K or 15 to 18? And should I be doing these long runs?
Great question. Love that one. I think definitely 15 to 18. In fact, 18. It's 15 to 18, but 18 would be great. And it should be once a week. And it is bread and butter. So I talk to people, the first thing I talk to them about is if you only do one thing a week, it's the long run. And ultimately, that's what you are doing, because ultimately you are racing at a particular distance and your training in one run is to get as close to that distance as we possibly can, with a few sessions and a few other runs around it in the week, and your weekly mileage enough to make sure that you can build up strength to get through the distance. So that's pretty much my training philosophy. So every week and that sort of 3/4, even if you could get to race distance, even better. I was running 35K on a Sunday morning, and you think, well, that's about 75% of race distance, my 42K, but I ran another 10K that night. I'm not encouraging you to do that, but that was how important it was for me to be doing more than race distance. I did it in 2 runs, but I did cover it in the day.
That's a massive help. Thank you, Steve. And we're now getting to a really interesting topic, and it can be a really unsettling time. We've had a huge investment in training as runners. We're getting down to those last few weeks where we could often do something to derail the performance or to impact race day. And this is a question around tapering. And what we've had come in here is, look, my training program has a 3-week taper. I feel this is excessive and I feel really underdone on race week. Would I be better with, say, a 2-week taper? And obviously it's individual, but we'd love your advice.
Again, this is a ripper question. And think about this. So you've trained for 4 weeks and you're going to taper for 3. Probably not going to work. Okay, you haven't trained. That'd only be 1 week of training and 3-week taper. So it really depends on how much training you've got. So I did a 3 or 4 week taper because I'd trained for 12 months, 10 years, really. I was preparing for these races cumulative over years and years. So for me, a 3 or 4 week taper was all relative to the amount of running that I'd done. So if you've done 16 weeks, say 15 weeks, that's a nice number. I like to think if you've done a 15-week training block, about a fifth of that is 3 weeks. So a 3-week taper is fine. If you've done an 8-week training block, I'm probably thinking you might only need a 2-week taper. And if you've done a 4-week training block, you don't need to taper at all. Just keep going because you obviously haven't done enough running to deserve a taper. So you're actually training into the event. You'll probably get fit during the race. So it's relative to the amount of training that you've done. And it might be excessive 3 weeks if you've only done 8 or 9, but if you've done a really good solid training block, you will need 3 weeks. And remember, you can actually taper for 3 weeks. And if you're feeling a little bit fresh, you can actually do a bit of running that last week. If you're feeling so fresh that you want to do a bit, you can train up a little bit more again, but just do that off a plan or with your coach or with someone as a sounding board because you don't want to be tired leading into the race.
That's super, super helpful, Steve. Hopefully you won't have too many people running straight through to the start line and then kicking into it. But that's a really good way to kick into our racing questions. So now things are getting really exciting. We are heading towards the start line. Let's have a look into the most popular questions as they relate to racing for our runners. And the first one's a really nice place to start. And what we'd love to know is Steve's racing experience. So when was your first marathon and how did it go and what did you learn?
Well, that's a great story. And don't take this as probably the textbook way to do it, but I got selected to run the 10K at the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh in 1986. And a few months out, my coach suggested I might run the marathon as well, and which I did. And so 6 days after finishing 5th in the 10K, I ran the marathon and won a bronze medal. Pretty good outcome, really. Wasn't that hard. And all I'd done in training is I'd added 14 minutes. I used to run 7-minute miles, if people can relate to mileage. And I used to do 18 miles on a Sunday morning, which was 2 hours and 6 minutes. And I bumped it out to 20 miles. So again, that 35K that I did at the end of my career, I was heading out to that. So at 20 miles, 32K, I added that 14 minutes onto the back end of my long run. Again, stressing the importance of the long run. And it served me pretty well. I ran 2:11:18 or something in my first ever marathon. So it was a pretty good debut. And I remember going over on the plane, a 10K track runner. I got on the plane on the way home. I was a marathon runner. So it started pretty well.
What an incredible turn of events, and difficult to manage future expectations when you're starting off so strongly with medals, but that's an incredible performance. We've got a great little question here around nutrition. Again, we really realise this is such a personal topic, but what our runners put in here for race is that their gut responds well to liquid nutrition, but to get the recommended cups of course nutrition in, or 240 calories per hour, they would need to take 1 to 2 cups at alternate refreshment stations, which could be a little bit awkward. Would they be better taking 1 cup for each refreshment or supplementing with a gel? It'd be interesting just to hear your approach on that. And we've certainly got some guidelines. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, nutrition, not my strong point. I used to just train really hard, and I think being fit helped me. I had the 8 drink stations. So we didn't have gels. I'm talking real old school. So I had sports drinks. So at 8 drink stations, every 5K, we would have a drink station. I had about 200 mils in a sauce bottle or drink bottle. And I'd run along and get as much down as I could just to top up those electrolytes and get a bit of fluid on board. So that worked well for me. General runners may not have access to those elite drinking stations. There may only be water, or there might be a sports drink that you haven't used before. So having your own gel and having practiced it in training is really important. And it gives you the flexibility to have it whenever you want. But I use the guide. If you've got 2 or 3 gels with you, then a drink station is probably a reminder to get them on board. You want to have it probably 1 drink station earlier than when you need it, because you're better getting it on board before you need it. So 10K, 20K, 30K, maybe 1 in your back pocket if you're really getting tired at 37, 38, might just get you over the line. But it gives you the flexibility. If you're carrying the gels with you, you can have them whenever you want. And if you've got too many, it's better to have too many than not enough. So why wouldn't you use that nutrition if you got the opportunity? I never did have that opportunity, and so I just used the drink stations. But if you got the opportunity to do it, why wouldn't you? And I would be trying to have that. As a reminder, normally you have your gel first. So as you're coming up, you're approaching the drink station, have your gel first and then grab a water to wash it down. And if you did that every second drink station, I think you'd be served pretty well.
That's really helpful and great to hear your experience on that as well. We've certainly got some very clear guidelines on this in our last webinar around nutrition, but the key thing that we've obviously heard Steve and our nutritionists say is you've got to not come into the race and try anything new, especially with nutrition. And with your longer runs, there's some really clear opportunities that you can actually practice this to make sure that you're not going to make any critical errors on the nutrition front on race day. Now, pacing has been a huge topic, and we get a lot of questions here, and I think this is a cracker. It's a very short question. But in terms of best times or performances, what do you reckon, Steve? Even pace or negative splits? And we might need to just explain some negative splits and what they might mean for the audience there as well.
For me, it was always even pace. In fact, I used to allow for 2 minutes at the back end. So if I went through halfway in a marathon in 65 minutes, then I would be thinking, well, I'm probably on track to run about 2:12. So that 2 minutes was my buffer. Now, obviously, if you're a 4-hour marathon runner, it's not going to be 2 minutes. It might be 5 minutes at the back end. So I always like to go through a little bit quicker through the first half. So in my world, that would be positive splitting 2 minutes. Now, there was sort of a time through the end of the 90s and the early noughties where people were negative splitting in marathons, where they'd have paces and they'd go out at a set pace and then they would run the second half of the race. Once the paces dropped out, they'd actually get going and run the second half quicker. So there was a bit of a school of thought that your best run was to negative split, but I think it'd be fair to say that generally across the board, most people allow for even splits and just to slow down a little bit in that back half. It's really difficult to hold even splits all the way across the marathons. But I think it's the best way to spread out your energy stores. So you talk about your nutrition, your training. That's the most efficient way to do it. I remember at the Commonwealth Games in 1990, one of the runners in the race took off after about 5K and they sprinted down the road. And we all just looked at each other and had a laugh because we knew that sprinting was going to use energy so much quicker, and that energy was going to be energy you'd be wanting to save for the back end of the race. And sure enough, 15K down the road, he was on the side of the road and we cruised past and had a really strong run to the finish. So setting an even pace where you're making sure you're not wasting energy by doing these spurts along the way is the best way to run a marathon.
Outstanding. And this leads into our last race question here really, really well. And I think there are also some pitfalls in this, but should you chase a time? And I think what the question means is, should you chase a time in terms of how well you're feeling on the day, or should you stick to the plan?
I had a race a few weeks ago and I was actually feeling pretty good, and I hadn't done the distance. It was 23K and I hadn't ran that far in training regularly in the lead up, and I sort of had a plan and I wanted to go a bit earlier, but I just stuck to it. And I had a group I was running with. I said, no, look, run with these guys till 10, run till 11, because at 11, you got 10K to go to the marathon. I said, run to 13, because then it's 23K this race. So stick with them for 13. Then I've got 10K at the back end. As it turns out, I ran with them till about 16K. I knew I only had 5K then to get through the half marathon distance. And I actually benefited from that. I ran home really strongly. So the last couple of K, I was running quicker. So for me, having a plan leading in, it really made me stick to that group rather than, I know I was really tempted to go harder, and I'm sure I would have got tired at the back end and I wouldn't have had such a positive outcome. So really sticking to the plan. I had that message in my head. It was like someone was sitting on my shoulder saying, no, come on, be patient. You'll benefit from this. You know you're going to need this in the last few K. So just spread out and stick to the plan, back yourself in, and you'll be fine. So for me, it was really being strong enough, knowing in the lead up that I'd done this amount of training and being realistic the night before, just making sure I kept reinforcing mentally in my mind that I was going to stick to this race plan and just execute as best I possibly could on the day.
Steve, I'm going to pass across to Kylie shortly, but before I do, I'd love to ask you about the one best piece of advice for a running race you could pass on. For many of us, it would have been a long time since we're on a start line. Some may have been doing a lot of races, or for many, it might be the very first run experience. If you could pass on your favourite running tip to help us out on race day, that would be awesome.
For me, it's racing is the public display of all the hard work that you've put in. And it's kind of not rocket science. You know, you get what you deserve. That's what I love about distance running is if you put in the work, then you stand on the start line with a smile on your face because you know the outcome's going to be good. And what I love to think about is be less focused on the time and the place and being so regimented, so focused. When you've worked so hard, you should be able to let yourself enjoy the moment. So something like Gold Coast events, anything you're running up there, enjoy, be on the start line and just sort of take a moment to say, hey, I deserve to be here. It's been a long training journey. And wow, isn't this just a terrific place to be? You're in quite a unique position. You're one of few people who've been able to get their body in a place to be able to run a 42K, a 21, a 10, a 5K event. So just enjoy the moment. And when the race goes, try and soak up the atmosphere, have a smile on your face, enjoy being a part of what is a really special event. You know, we've come out of COVID, we've had a couple of years of difficult times, and to get yourself to be able to be in a place to enjoy an event like that. So I kind of like to think the race is sort of the fun bit, and you've done all the training and they can be hard. You know, I've been in Ballarat, it's pouring rain, it's freezing cold, and suddenly here I am on the start line at the Gold Coast, the sun's shining, the sun's just come up, it's early in the morning on the start line of the half marathon. I look around and I think, how good's this? Where else would you want to be?
Steve, thanks so much for your insights and your fantastic stories here already. Now, you've been using the new Polar Pacer Pro and really putting it through its paces. So could you share with us some of your first impressions?
I really enjoyed wearing the Polar Pacer Pro. What I love is the feedback afterwards. So whilst I focus on time and distance, so for me, it's all about how many Ks I get for the week. And then obviously the average time, if I'm doing some reps, the K times or my 20-minute fartleks, I need to be able to see the time so I know when to go start my reps and when to recover. But the great thing for me has been the feedback afterwards. So, you know, when I come back and sync it, I can see how the session's great analysis, the breakdown of the hills. You know, I can even split it up. If I want 500 metre rather than K reps, I can break it down. So that feedback's been really, really good. And then the bonus for me is sleep time. So I've never worn a watch to bed. So for me to be able, that's been a bit of an adjustment, but the feedback to see how I'm recovering and how I'm managing my stress levels has been really good. So I've enjoyed it. It's continual feedback. I think that's the thing that I've probably really enjoyed is that there's always something there that's giving me feedback about my activity levels and just how I'm coping generally across the board in life.
That's great to hear. And you've really touched on what we've tried to achieve with the Polar Pacer series, to give you everything you need and nothing you don't. What I love about it is it's lightweight and the battery is long lasting so that you can get that 24/7 tracking with no interruptions. And it's designed so that you can get the most out of your running based on what's important for you. So that could be load management, or it might be intensity monitoring or sleep and recovery. And we've got John here, our sports scientist, who's going to walk us through how some of these features work.
With the new Polar Pacer watch series, we are extremely proud to have been able to improve our gold standard heart rate technology and make it even more accurate, with 10 LEDs across a range of wavelengths and 4 light detectors to give you the most accurate heart rate measurement. Alongside improved GPS technology, you can get the most accurate data to provide insight and feedback to your training. As Steve has mentioned, the really informative feedback you get while running with the new Pacer devices. And you can also customize your watch to see what's important for you when running, whether it's speed or pace, distance, time, heart rate, running power, even down to the remaining rest time until your next interval. In the first webinar of the series, we covered the different types of runs that can comprise a successful running program, from easy to long runs, threshold or tempo runs, and interval training sessions. Well, with the live feedback and feedback received following the session, you can ensure that you've executed your run correctly and achieved your targets. And here's a nice example. The goal of this session was a long, steady run at around the upper limits of heart rate zone 2, and it was a success, with 97% of the session spent in the target heart rate zones. So you can control your intensity and pace on the fly during your session with live data feedback, and also review the session afterwards to confirm you achieved your session goal, maximize the effectiveness of your run, and also review feedback on the benefits of different types of runs. Steve mentioned the importance of keeping an eye on how well you're dealing with your training load. And this is done for you based on your own training sessions, and you'll also receive feedback on whether you're doing too much, too little, or are coping well with your training and could afford to push a little bit more. Steve also mentioned the importance of reducing your training load in the weeks leading up to a key event. And with automatic training load management, this is also done for you, so you can arrive at your event rested, injury-free, and ready to go. The Pacer Pro and Pacer Watch weigh in at only 41 grams and are comfortable enough to wear overnight. They're virtually unnoticeable. And of course, we agree with Stephen that the recovery feedback, which is based on comprehensive sleep tracking and automatic overnight heart rate and heart rate variability monitoring, is second to none and extremely valuable, providing you with the insights and feedback on how your body's coping with training and life stresses to assist you in staying free of injury and illness so you can continue to hit the road and meet your running goals.
Thanks so much, John. Just a quick reminder, everyone, if you haven't already, it would mean a lot to us to see you in the Polar Running Club. Do click the link on the screen and verify. It's free to join, and you'll get access to our best content to help you in your running, whether it's on programming, recovery, nutrition, race strategy, technology, and much more. You'll also go in the draw to win a new Polar running watch. As we've heard Steve Moneghetti recommend, it's extremely helpful for an upcoming race to get a really good race simulation in. We're excited to announce with our partners Running Heroes that we're going to celebrate Global Running Day on the 1st of June with a whole week of races, with 2 different runs that you can join in virtually. So from the 1st to the 7th of June, you can join a 5K or 10K challenge where we'll have up to 10 Polar Pacer Series new running watches up for grabs for first place getters and for entry prize draws. Do check into the link on the screen to get registered with Running Heroes and to lock in one of the challenges so that you can get your race tune-up scheduled and underway. And one of the best ways that you can also get a race simulation in, or just to enjoy a great weekly run, is to visit a park run near you. This is a community initiative that's very dear to our hearts. We're very proud to be a sponsor of Parkrun. So if you haven't done so, make sure you pop down to a parkrun near you on Saturday. Steve, it's also been great that you've been a big supporter of Parkrun as well.
I was a part of the group that set up the parkrun here in Ballarat. We've got a couple of them now, so I love you. And I've volunteered more than I've participated at parkruns. But if I'm at another city, and I travel a lot, might sneak over to Adelaide, up to Shepparton, and I've done parkruns all around the country, and they're just a fantastic way to get my run done, and it gives me a bit of a chance to have a hit out and do a session in a different place. But just the camaraderie, and they're a fantastic event. Everyone's welcome. That's what I love about it. It's so inclusive, and I think I was the tail runner at Ballarat. I'm not sure it was our 100th or 200th or something, or one of them. So everyone beat me that day, and it was a special occasion for everybody. So I just love parkrun. It's been a terrific way to get people engaged, such an inclusive environment, families, pets, everybody's allowed along. It's just a terrific part of my weekend. Lovely way to start your weekend, 8 o'clock for us, 7 o'clock for some parts of Australia. So get down, do yourself a favour. It's a terrific event.
And for our final webinar in this virtual series, we're really rapt to have Benita back with us to take us through tapering in even more detail. Not only has it been a big topic tonight, but it's one of the most highly requested topics that people want to know more about when coming into an important race. It's a really fine balance between being rested enough, but sharp enough to have a great race, as Benita is a 4-time Olympian and has held national records from the 3K up, including a world cross-country title, and is an outstanding coach in her own right. We couldn't think of anyone better to help get us towards our best on race day. If you or a running friend has a race coming up, be sure not to miss this. If you're registered already, you'll get a reminder the day before, or you can share the series via the link on screen. So from the whole team at Polar, thank you so much for being part of our virtual running clinic so far. We look forward to seeing you soon. And in the meantime, all the best with your running and stay safe out there.